Support for this show, Politics Done Right, comes from politicsdoneright.com, publishers of How to Make America Utopia, Take Away the Economy from Those Who Rigged It, As I See It, Class Warfare, The Only Resort to Right-Wing Doom, It's Worth It, How to Talk to Your Right-Wing Relatives, Friends, and Neighbors, and other books written by Egberto, Willies.
God is not asking you for what you don't have. He's asking you to trust Him with what you do have.
First of all, Project 2025 is not affiliated with the Trump campaign. Kevin Roberts is a friend of mine, but I wouldn't say that he speaks for the president in the same way I wouldn't say that he speaks for me.
I don't know what the hell it is. It's Project 25.
Trump publicly disavowed Project 2025.
You have said that this plan is about institutionalizing Trumpism. So, because I also know you all, not just the president of the Heritage Foundation, you're also president of the Heritage Action, which is the political action committee. And so, is it tied to Trump or not?
I said the work of the Heritage Foundation was to institutionalize Trumpism.
So Project 2025 is a plan to return America to a dark past. Donald Trump and his extreme allies want to take our nation back.
There's something wrong with Kamala, and I just don't know what it is, but there is definitely something missing.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies.
In this edition of Women Rising Radio, we hear from Andra Watkins, a New York Times bestselling author who grew up in a small town in South Carolina and was schooled in televangelist Jerry Falwell's Moral Majority, a Christian nationalist movement. With Andra, we examine the meaning of Christian nationalism and its aim to control women. We unpack the now infamous Project 2025 manifesto, which Andra sees as a Christian nationalist plan to take over the United States government.
It's the Republican Party's roadmap for converting our democracy into a Christo-fascist theocracy, and it belongs to the Republican Party. This is who the Republican Party is now.
Andra Watkins writes a popular Substack blog called How Project 2025 Will Ruin Your Life. Andra Watkins grew up in rural South Carolina and was raised in a Christian nationalist family. She is well versed in the doctrine of the moral majority, a fundamentalist social movement.
I spent 13 years in a school and church that was part of Jerry Falwell Sr.'s moral majority movement during the 70s and 80s. So really ground zero for the kind of Christian nationalism that we're seeing everywhere today. And I was indoctrinated in that. I spent my first year of college at Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia. But I really didn't start moving away from that Christian nationalist indoctrination until my early 30s. In Christian school kindergarten, I could recite passages of the King James Version even before I could read them well. Everything revolved around making sure we 5-year-olds understood our biblical roles. Boys were superior, girls existed to serve them. Christian nationalism teaches that men are the spiritual leaders and women are never to question men anywhere. Submitting to male dominion prepares girls for the feminine role of godly wife and mother. Girls are not to challenge this subservient role. When I strove for outcomes church leaders didn't consider feminine, I was controlled in several ways. 1, a woman would take me aside and reiterate God's expectations of godly girls and women. This often involved being told things didn't happen the way I said they did. I was exaggerating or being dramatic. 2, a man would confront me about my attitude problem or the sin of ambition and wanting things for which God didn't deem women worthy. I would be reminded that men didn't find such women attractive or appealing. If I ever hoped to get married, the only reason I existed, I needed to ask God to make me even more humble, pliant, and demure. 3, I would be punished and or made a public example, which usually involved people laughing and mocking me or telling me to know my place and stay in it. If I reacted with anything other than emotionless acceptance, I was branded hysterical or a drama queen or ridiculous or an embarrassment to my parents or difficult. 4, more than once, I was forced to watch a boy be given something I worked for. To prove I'd prayed about my bad attitude, I was compelled to do the work to make sure that boy looked good in the role and receive the credit. This is not about educating young people. It is control via psychological manipulation and narcissist abuse. It is truly sad that Christian nationalism has been more effective teaching people how to inflict psychological abuse than at building faith. When I was a teenager and having horrible cramps with my period that I didn't even understand were connected to reproduction because I couldn't learn about sex because then I might want to have it and that's terrible. I could not take birth control pills because my mother believed they caused abortions. So when I was having cramps to the point that I was vomiting and passing out and missing school every month for at least a day because I was in horrific pain, this was not something that was connected to being pregnant. I didn't know that my period was connected to my reproductive system. I was just told that this was part of the curse that God put on Eve for eating the fruit first and sinning first and tempting Adam to fall with her. So, it was just part of what women had to suffer because, women were such temptresses who made men do that. So I went on hormonal birth control before I married my good Christian husband, and he turned out to be emotionally abusive. He was starting to be somewhat physically abusive when we separated. And I thought that was all my fault. I just wasn't being a godly enough Christian wife. I was making him unhappy. I deserve this behavior. That's a lot of what women in these kinds of relationships are taught in that world. So it took a friend taking me aside and saying, I don't want to visit you in the ICU the next time I see you or worse. And then right after that we had an episode with a gun that he pulled out. So one of the reasons I decided to start speaking out about my own experience was because I don't want to see a whole generation of people in the United States be forced to live under these theocratic laws like I grew up and have so much of their opportunity and their agency taken away from them. And the resulting mental illnesses and psychological damage that this kind of stuff causes.
Project 2025 was written by the Heritage Foundation, an arch-conservative think tank that calls the 920-page mandate their policy Bible for reshaping the U.S. government. Andra Watkins took a deep dive into that document and recognizes the Christian nationalist doctrine behind it.
And I picked up Project 2025 and started reading it because I'd heard some things about it, but nobody was really talking about it very much. And I wasn't 5 pages in before there was a Bible verse that was embedded in the text. And I kept reading and finding these Christian nationalist themes and Bible verses buried in this text. And so I read the whole thing. Probably took me 2 months to get through it and mark it up. And by then, The Atlantic had done their issue devoted to Project 2025, but the media still really wasn't talking about it. And the way The Atlantic chose to talk about it was very dry and wonkish and academic and really didn't give anyone any sense of what this would do to them. It certainly didn't call it a Christo-fascist manifesto, which is absolutely what it is. And so I launched a Substack called How Project 2025 Will Ruin Your Life.
When a think tank publishes a manifesto for shaping the future of the United States government, it's important to know the background of its authors, in this case, many of ex-President Trump's key allies and advisors. Andra Watkins did a thorough investigation into who wrote Project 2025.
I did a very detailed public Google spreadsheet where some readers helped me, and we researched close to 250 of the people who contributed to Project 2025. Not the main listed authors, but almost 250 people contributed. And so we researched what groups they were affiliated with and what other jobs they'd had. And we found, for instance, that 5 of them had clerked for Samuel Alito, either when he was an appellate court judge or a Supreme Court justice. Ron DeSantis was everywhere. Multiple Republican state Texas politicians were in there. Tom Cotton, Mike Lee, all the people that you associate with Christian nationalism in Congress or listed in some way or another. These people had been chiefs of staff or worked in their offices or worked on committees with them, and they list all this stuff on their resume very proudly. We also found a whole list of Republican senators and congresspeople and governors. They had worked for these people. Ted Cruz was all over the place. Mike Johnson, Josh Hawley, Kristi Noem, South Dakota. It's drawn up by people who are deeply and profoundly tied to the Christian nationalist Republican Party. It's the Republican Party's roadmap for converting our democracy into a Christo-fascist theocracy, and it belongs to the Republican Party. This is who the Republican Party is now.
And, we did a great thing when we got Roe v. Wade out of the federal government, got it back to the states, and now the states are all voting.
Let's understand how we got here. Donald Trump hand-selected 3 members of the United States Supreme Court with the intention that they would undo the protections of Roe v. Wade. And they did exactly as he intended. And now in over 20 states, there are Trump abortion bans, which make it criminal for a doctor or nurse to provide health care. In one state, it provides prison for life. Trump abortion bans that make no exception even for rape and incest, which understand what that means. A survivor of a crime of violation to their body does not have the right to make a decision about what happens to their body next. That is immoral.
Reproductive rights for women are under attack in the United States. Christian nationalist doctrine forbids abortion, even in cases of rape or incest, and promotes a nationwide ban on most forms of birth control. Andra Watkins explains how Project 2025 would mandate those core tenets, further eroding the separation of church and state.
It is a Christian nationalist charge to make our laws match their interpretation of God's law. So you see a great example of that nationwide with abortion bans. Christian nationalists believe that the Bible condemns abortion, even though it never says the word abortion, but they cobble this argument together. So when Christian nationalists passed abortion bans, they legitimately believe that once sperm meets egg and fertilizes it, that is a real human being. And so that's why they want abortion to be banned from fertilization. That's why they would go after something like hormonal birth control, which they've already started, because they believe hormonal birth control creates a hostile environment in the womb so that these fertilized zygotes cannot implant themselves. So they believe that is murdering a human being. And I believe this Christo-fascist thinking of abortion as murder is a really convenient way for them to control people. I believe that they really care about white replacement and want more white women to have children.
Based on her upbringing in the moral majority movement, Andra connects Christian nationalism to white supremacy. She explains how the two ideologies are used to justify horrific policies like slavery.
Christian nationalists have 7 core beliefs that they cling to. The first is that America was founded as a Christian nation and a white Christian nation because the people who came here fleeing persecution in Europe were white people. So they align really nicely with white supremacists because they are white supremacists. Many of them teach from their pulpits the curse of Ham or curse of Ham's son doctrine that plantation owners in the South before the Civil War used to justify enslaving people, which was that God cursed colored peoples for sin that Ham's son committed. And so for all time, colored peoples were inferior because they were cursed by God. So my pastor growing up actually taught that from the pulpit. And many Christian nationalists believe that.
Leading up to the 2024 presidential election, voters and politicians attempted to figure out what Project 2025 really says about abortion and reproductive care. While there is no outright nationwide abortion ban proposed in Project 2025, the document states on page 450 that the principal goal of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services should be, quote, protecting life, conscience, and bodily integrity. It mandates that Health and Human Services should, quote, pursue a robust agenda to protect the fundamental right to life. Right to life and pro-life are bywords of the anti-abortion and anti-birth control movements. Project 2025 also calls for defunding Planned Parenthood. Millions of women access routine health care through Planned Parenthood. Its abortion services are a small percentage of what it offers to women. Anti-choice activists have been working to ban the use of mifepristone, the first of two pills taken together to terminate a pregnancy in the first 11 weeks. This medication, known as the abortion pill, accounted for about 65% of terminated pregnancies in 2023. The Project 2025 mandate calls for the Justice Department to block all birth control methods by enforcing the Comstock Act of 1873, which bans sending so-called obscene materials through the mail. Pro-choice activists oppose using a 150-year-old law to classify birth control as obscene. Project 2025 would also withhold federal money from states that don't report to the Center for Disease Control, or CDC, on how many abortions take place within their borders. Andra Watkins says that kind of surveillance of women and healthcare providers runs contrary to traditional Republican values of keeping the government out of one's personal business, but not when it comes to women's health.
They believe that sexual immorality, as they define it, causes God's judgment on a whole society. Two people fornicating who aren't married causes God to judge the whole people. And so they don't believe that sex and sexual situations are things that should be private. They believe they have a right to be in our bedrooms and in our back seats.
Project 2025 would prohibit abortion training for doctors and nurses, putting women's lives at risk in the case of miscarriage and other complications. So the language of Project 2025, while not stating openly that abortion will be banned, outlines a clear strategy for getting rid of it nationwide.
They really do want Christian women, these young Christian women, to just get married and start having babies. You know, women don't need educations because they just need to be godly Christian wives and mothers. That's what I was taught.
Speaking of education, Project 2025 has explicit plans to eliminate the U.S. Department of Education. It would also axe the Head Start program, which provides preschool for low-income families, benefiting some 800,000 children ages 3 to 5 each year. Cutting Head Start would drastically reduce access to childcare and other services that allow parents, especially single mothers, to go to work and support their families. Andra Watkins tells us that Project 2025 would also implement a Christian nationalist curriculum.
The mainstream media has made a lot of their wanting to do away with the Department of Education and send the control of education to the states. What they haven't talked as much about is their ultimate goal to make all education in this country Christian nationalist religious indoctrination from pre-K, paid for by the taxpayer. So that's their ultimate goal. And that's what red states are already doing. They allow vouchers. They're so big on vouchers because that's one way to rob public schools of money and defund them and give money to religious Christian private schools. And who cares about the people in these public schools who can't get educated because of that? Because, in the South, they're all black anyway. So who cares about them? It is frightening that states like Texas and Florida are doing everything they can to push Christian nationalist indoctrination into public schools, that Louisiana wants to force every public school child to see the Ten Commandments, or that Oklahoma's superintendent of education is requiring a copy of the Bible in every public school classroom. Christian nationalist Republicans won't stop until every young mind is as controlled as mine was, complete with the psychological damage, physical violence, and broken lives it creates. All children deserve better.
And you know what we're doing here? I say it all the time. I'm dying to get back to do this. We will ultimately eliminate the federal Department of Education and send education back to Wisconsin and back to the states.
Regarding both education and labor, Project 2025 advocates for the strict observance of Sunday as the Sabbath. It would promote religious education and observance in the workplace and give preference to families where there is a man doing family-supporting work and a woman who is a stay-at-home mother. With its education and workplace rules, Project 2025 signals its intention to use religion to curtail women's rights, women's choice, and women's opportunities. Project 2025 mandates tight controls over the media and journalists, criminalizing press leaks and whistleblowing. It proposes the elimination of the White House press corps, giving preference to journalists whose viewpoints mirror those of the president. Andrew Watkins describes this as a key to Project 2025's plan for authoritarian rule in the United States.
Project 2025 calls for a unitary executive, essentially a dictator or a king, where the government lines up behind the president and his agenda. And they say that repeatedly. It is the job of the government to carry out the president's agenda. And everyone under the executive branch, for example, the Department of Justice and the FBI, would report directly to the president and carry out the president's agenda. James Madison and Thomas Jefferson and others were very adamant in their writings that the president was not a king and the president was not above the law. But their plans for the press are to create a sort of White House propaganda machine with a Joseph Goebbels type person who coordinates all that. They plan to restructure access to the president by only allowing people who agree to parrot the president's agenda verbatim to have access to the president. And I mean, that's absolutely not at all what our founders envisioned, but that's what autocratic governments do. They want to force journalists to reveal their sources and so that they can go after people for trying to tell the truth about what's happening. So I would imagine under their government, there would be a lot more oppression of the press and a lot more jailing of the press and a lot more jailing of people who cooperate with the press that's critical of the regime. I'm not exaggerating when I say that they are that iron-fisted about how they treat the press in autocratic countries. And Project 2025 and Republicans who wrote it have learned well from them. Viktor Orban came to the Heritage Foundation and has worked with them to craft some of these policies because he's further down the road than Republicans are here.
Hungry, strong country, run by very powerful, tough leaders, tough guy. Press doesn't like him because he's tough.
Don't be afraid. Just believe in St. John Paul's, the Polish Pope's teaching. There is no enemy that Christ has not already defeated. So let's go out and do it. God bless Texas. God bless our friendship. Good luck and goodbye.
Viktor Orban, Hungary's autocratic leader, has visited the United States, taking photos with Donald Trump and his wealthy backers. Orban is a high-profile figure enmeshed in a global web of corporate oligarchs and politicians pushing an authoritarian agenda. Hungarian women are at the forefront of the resistance to his plans. In 2018, Anna Julia Donath, leader of Hungary's progressive Momentum Party, lifted a torch to inaugurate a mass protest against Orban's attempts to pass what protesters called a slave law that would force long overtime hours on Hungarian workers. Anna Julia Donath was thrown to the ground and arrested, but an ad hoc army of women followed her to jail, protecting her cell phone and laptop, and demanded her release. Ms. Donath continues to challenge the authoritarian agenda of Viktor Orban, bringing her slate of progressive issues to the European Union as a member of the EU Parliament. In 2021, she gave a plenary speech denouncing censorship and control of social media.
My fellow MPs, I'm glad that the European Union has also recognized that big tech companies need to be regulated. The problem is that autocratic leaders want to do the same, not for the interests of people, but to promote their own power. After Poland, the Hungarian government also announced that it would like to impose its own authority on Facebook. Would we really let Viktor Orban tell us what Hungarians can post on Facebook? Let us not doubt that the only goal of the Hungarian government is to cut the last thread of public life, namely the media. My fellow MPs, this is why we need a European regulation to prevent this.
Andra points out that, like Hungary's Orban, framers of Project 2025 are willing to go to extremes to enforce their authoritarian ideas. She sees great danger in a president who is placed above the law. Andra says that Christian nationalists are taught to support unchecked executive power. She warns that some may even be willing to use violence to establish autocratic and theocratic rule.
I remember sitting in a pew when I was in elementary school and hearing my pastor say, the government is trying to shut down churches and is persecuting us and is going to tell us that we cannot worship Jesus the way we want to. And someday, dear people, you might have to take up arms and kill your fellow Americans for your right to worship Jesus. And I remember sitting there thinking, I was probably like 8 years old, thinking, some of my family members, extended family members aren't Christians. Am I going to have to kill them? What does this mean? I don't understand. But you think about all the people in America who sat in those pews for 50 years, who did not take off-ramps and leave that environment when they were given off-ramps. How radicalized are so many of those people?
As the U.S. Constitution makes clear, our government was intended to be secular, not favoring any one religion. But Andra Watkins says that Christian nationalists don't want parity for all religious groups. They demand Christian supremacy. That is a profound and fundamental challenge to our founding document and to our democracy.
They have a very specific vision of what they want to see happen, and they are doggedly and ruthlessly working toward making it happen. They don't care how many people die. They don't care how many people it harms. They don't care if the planet burns up. They are doggedly and ruthlessly determined to create the world that they want.
And that's it for this edition of Women Rising Radio. Special thanks to Keith Hernandez and the UC Berkeley Language Center and to Andrea Petto. News courtesy of CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and Democracy Now! Music courtesy of Bob Dylan and the Party Time Karaoke Channel. Women Rising Radio's producer is Lynn Feinerman. Our audio engineer for this program is Martine Carmona. And I'm your host, Sandina Robbins. Thanks for listening.
Welcome to another edition of Politics Done Right. My name is Egberto, Willies, your host. Today, we're honored to have Bob Gatty. Bob Gatty is the founder of the Not Fake News blog. Gatty has lived and worked in Irwin, Jeanette, and Greensboro in Westmoreland County, PA, and attended Point Park College in Pittsburgh. He has worked for the Tribune Review and UPI, among other news outlets in PA. He is the co-author of Hijacked Nation, Donald Trump's Attack on America's Greatness. Hello, Bob. How are you doing this afternoon?
Hey, man, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, well, we're in sort of near the twilight zone. It's about time for us to get to decide who's going to be the president of the country. But beforehand, you created this blog called Not Fake News, and I think you turned it into a podcast by another name. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually, it started out as Not Fake News in 2016, and a couple of years later, I changed it to Lean to the Left. I just wanted people to know really what it was all about, and then I decided that it needed to have a podcast, and so I started the podcast Lean to the Left as well.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure. I started out, as you indicated in my in your intro, I started out as a journalist and ended up working in Washington, D.C. as a communications guy. I worked for two congressmen, one a Republican and the other a Democrat. Jim Florio was a Democrat from New Jersey, and I was his chief of staff and press secretary. And I worked for him for a couple of years, and then he decided to run for governor. I didn't want to go back to New Jersey, so I started a communications business, and I worked for business clients, trade associations, business magazines for about 30 years. And then I decided to retire and moved to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, because we have family here. And that's when I started my blog on my website.
Now, how's that going? How's your, I imagine right now it's about that time where people are anxious and looking for all that kind of info, huh?
Oh, man, I'm telling you what, I'm going crazy. I've got... I'm doing 2 episodes a week and on my podcast, and both video and audio. And right now it's all politics. And I just I have a special that I do every month. It's called the Dixie Dems, and I have a guy from Georgia and a guy from North Carolina. And the three of us, since I'm in South Carolina, the three of us are the Dixie Dems, and we get together once a month and we talk politics. And this month, of course, it's all focused on the election. We just did an episode yesterday, which is now streaming, that focuses on the election, on the upcoming election, and both my pals from Georgia and North Carolina believe that Harris has a pretty good shot at taking those 2 battleground states, which, if that would happen, would be really big for her. So I'm hoping that they're right.
It would almost be game over. Actually, I looked at some of the polls this morning, and actually the polls are, even though I have come to the belief that many of the polls are not correct, I think these guys are so scared because they've undercounted Trump's vote for so long that they now believe that it's sort of skewed against her. And I think they're gonna, I've been for the last several months, I've been saying this election was not going to be a close election. Forget about what the polls are saying. I guess it will be clear whether I'm vindicated or not back in on Tuesday. But anyhow, so talking to these guys, and including the state where you're from, PA, why is it that Trump really have any kind of notion of possibly being president at all?
Well, that is really hard for me to understand as well. I just don't understand how, especially women, can support this man. I don't, and I don't understand how young people can support this man. I don't understand that. I don't understand how any person of color could support this man. I don't understand how any Hispanic person, any brown person from outside of this country could support this man. He's vindictive, cruel. It's just he's a criminal. He's been convicted of being a criminal. It's just impossible for me to believe. And in our book, Hijacked Nation, we begin with it's all a series of essays from my blog site, Lean to the Left, and it tells a story in kind of a play-by-play sort of the major developments, political developments since the insurrection in 2001, and what's happened since then, and how Trump has continued to deny that the election was lost to Joe Biden, and there's a major section that deals with Project 2025. I have a couple of writers who did an outstanding job of pulling apart Project 2025 and discussing in relatively short essays the key elements of it and the impact that they would have, especially when.
Before, let me interrupt you there a second, Bob. Before we get there, there's a chapter in your book that talks about just President Biden's legacy. I noticed in the book you put chapter 5 after, you put Project 25 ahead of Biden's legacy. Here's the thing. One of the reasons Trump seemed to be competitive in this race is a complete misrepresentation of his legacy, meaning Donald Trump's legacy as far as what type of economy he had, as well as a misrepresentation of the corrective nature of Biden's economy, which pretty much cleaned up his mess and then launched forward. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it just is an incredible thing. Trump misrepresents everything all the way along. It's amazing to me how he can take a negative, something that where he's to blame, where he's got a big problem, and he turns it around as though that never happened, and he flips it around onto the Democrats. The whole thing about preserving our democracy. Democrats are very concerned about the effort that Trump is making and the promise that Trump has made to become an autocrat, to become a dictator. That's what he wants. And yet they claim that it's the Democrats who are trying to infringe on people's freedoms, on people's ability to live in a democratic society. It's just incredible to me, and
don't you think that the media has a lot to do with it? There it is that, like I mentioned before, when we take a look at the economy, I mean, President Obama said it best when he said Donald Trump's first 2 years, 3 years was really the continuation of his economy. And if you look at the charts, that's exactly what you see. And then after that came a crash for which people don't blame him for the pandemic, though he was responsible for the mismanagement of the pandemic, which subsequently Biden cleaned up.
Yeah, for sure. Like, how much Clorox did you consume in order to get rid of COVID? Huh?
Yeah, it is amazing. Now let's go ahead and make a shift here to Project 25, because I think we're probably half through here. You actually said that you had somebody who wrote, or some of your book consists of some good, well-written essays that kind of encapsulate the most important parts of Project 2025. If you were to go ahead and tell me, what should Americans really be concerned the most of? I mean, I have some points that I think we should be concerned of, but I like hearing what other people have seen in that 900-something page report that pretty much is. Yeah, I don't know if you remember at one time it used to be the contract for America that the GOP used to have. Yeah. Now this almost is more than a contract on America, but a contract to destroy America.
Oh, absolutely it is. And I mean, it's hard to pull it apart. You take a look at the what they would do with respect to abortion, with respect to contraception. For crying out loud, I can't understand how it is that Republicans would actually want to infringe upon people's ability to protect themselves when they're having an intimate situation. They it's just hard to imagine. But you go into immigration. You go into what do they want to do? They want to deport. They want to spend billions of dollars to deport people back to their countries. People who are really actually needed in this country. For example, I lived in Maryland for a long time, and in Maryland, hard-shell crabs are a big product.
Yeah.
And the area where those crabs come from largely is Trump country. Those people who work in those crab factories are largely immigrants. Local people don't want to be picking crabs apart.
Right.
Yeah. But that whole industry would go down the tubes if Trump was able to get in and actually impose his immigration deportation plan.
Well, nobody ever said that hate was sane, right?
Oh God!
Nobody ever said hate. But here's the thing that what a lot of people don't understand: the immigration issue would just be, and I don't know if you've discussed this on your blog cast before, but immigration would simply be another cash cow for Trump. Let me give a good example. You just made a great point where you said in some parts of Maryland, the people that are cleaning up the crabs and getting the crabs, etc. A lot of it is the immigrant communities, and that applies to the picking of the peaches in Georgia, or the picking of the tomatoes in the Southwest, etc. But here's the kicker: what you think Trump's people would do? They would simply turn the blind eye to anybody who pays a bribe to continue to have those people in. So it is. People look at it as say, well, he's going to deport all these people. I look at it as being unable to create a new market, and that new market is a black market where you bribe to maintain those people who are working. Your thoughts on that?
That's an incredible thing to even postulate. I live here in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina right now, and it's where we moved when I retired, and we built a small home in a neighborhood. It wasn't a custom home. It was a home that was, built by a big housing manufacturing company. And the people who actually did the work on this house were immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
When I wanted to expand my patio in the backyard, I decided to hire some of these folks. And they did excellent work, and they did it for a very reasonable cost. And they were happy to have the work. Now, if Trump begins deporting all these folks, the housing manufacturing industry is going to suffer greatly. And yet it's those same people who are supporting this man. I don't get it. Do you get it?
Well, no, I don't. But here's the funny thing, because you've just gave an economic lesson right there. Here's the kicker. These are the things that Donald Trump stands for. He stands for increasing tariffs across the board, which means all these people that buy these cheap Chinese trinkets, which is what Walmart is full of,
right?
Their prices will go up. That's number one. Number two, you talk about the construction industry losing people, which means all the costs of homes, all the costs of construction goes up. Who pays the price again? The middle class person. All the fruits and the fruits and vegetables, etc., that gets picked, because we don't have the manpower or the person power to do that. Those prices are going to go up. So everything that he does will actually have a hard impact on his people, as it bloats the pocketbooks of those people that, again, inflation, somebody makes the money from inflation, right? And those are the people at the top.
Yep. Exactly. Well, it's hard to understand, how all of this could come down. But the bottom line is that if Trump wins this election, we are going to be in some deep doo-doo when it comes to our economy. The whole idea of these tariffs that he wants to impose. Can you imagine what the cost of an automobile would be? Many of the parts of our cars are
made overseas.
Overseas.
Yeah.
And I just bought a new Mustang Mach-E electric car.
Mm-hmm.
Most of that car, the parts of it came from other countries.
Mm-hmm.
That car, when I bought it, was $46,000. Imagine what it would be if Trump's tariffs went into place. They wouldn't be able to sell those cars at all.
I think on electric cars, he wants a minimum of 100% tariff. So you'll be talking about almost $100,000 for your car.
Exactly right. And so tell me this, why does Musk support this guy?
Oh, there's a reason why, because he does business with the government. And if Trump is there, he'll be Trump's stooge. Trump would be his stooge, and he'll be able to get all the contracts, et cetera, et cetera. It's right now we are, as Fareed Zakaria said today, we are in the process of becoming Putin's Russia, a kleptocracy, which is what, and again, there are a lot of people that don't have a problem with that. But anyway, look, the name of the book is, and I tell you what, folks, it's a good one. They're called Hijacked Nation, Donald Trump's Attack on America's Greatness by Bob Gatty, your person on the screen right now, as well as CJ Waldron. Why don't you give me a closing statement, my friend?
Well, listen, I thank you so much for having me on. And you guys, if you're interested in looking into the some of the facts as to what went down since the insurrection, with respect to Donald Trump and the Republicans, check out Hijacked Nation. You can find it on Amazon, on Barnes and Noble. There's a hardback version, there's a paperback, and there's a Kindle version that's available.
I will make sure and have all that information along with links in the blog, because the better informed we are, the better decisions we're able to make. But look, it's been my pleasure to have you on the show, Bob, and I hope you'll come back. And look, I am 90% sure on Tuesday night, those on the progressive end of the spectrum will have not only a happy night for the presidency, but vote for the House and the Senate. So,
you know what? I hope you're right. I'm beginning to feel that way too. I was a little shaky last week, but today I saw I keep getting these emails from people that are running betting sites, political betting sites. Mm-hmm. And money is now moving to Harris.
Right.
Last week it was moving to Trump.
Right.
But this week it's moving to Harris.
Right.
And you know what? I think maybe his garbage truck thing.
That was fun. But it was funny on so many different ways. It was funny because he couldn't get into the truck. It was funny because pasting your logo on a garbage truck almost says your logo is garbage. It's amazing that he didn't see the connotation of putting your logo on a garbage truck. But look, it's been my pleasure to have you, Bob Gatty, author of Hijacked Nation, Donald Trump's Attack on America's Greatness.
Thank you so much.
I'm watching the TV, and between now and December 7th, I got to jump on the Medicare Advantage thing again. I'm watching this ad, and as I'm watching this ad, I'm getting more and more upset because I care about people. I genuinely, and all of us should care about our fellow persons, right? And this ad, there's a new site out that all these companies that give Medicare Advantage are using to centralize choosing the product. And you sit down and you call that number, and that number goes through not Medicare. It goes through a list of hundreds of, well, I don't know if it's hundreds, probably so, hundreds of different Medicare Advantage options to select for you based on what medicines you're taking and what things you need, etc.
Have you compared your Medicare plan recently? With eHealth, you can compare Medicare plans side by side for free. So we invited people to give eHealth a try and discover how easy it can be to find your Medicare match.
This is pretty amazing. I can go on a vacation with this money.
I have quite a few prescriptions.
That's why people call us. We're going to compare plans, and I'm going to try to get you as much bang for your buck as possible.
That's great.
This one here covers all your prescriptions, your doctors as well.
Oh, wonderful.
I have a hard time with this.
That's okay. That's what I'm here for. Based on our conversation today, I would highly recommend this plan.
You're so helpful. You don't know.
I'm excited for you, sir. Again, my name is Cham. If you have any other questions, give me a ring.
Thank you very much.
And all people over 65 are calling in, many of them giving up their traditional Medicare because this plan sounds cheaper. The other plan sounds cheaper. And I'm pulling the hair out of my head that I don't have. I'm bald-headed. By the way, we're on YouTube as well, so you can see I'm bald-headed and pulling my... I don't even have stubs right now. I shaved well yesterday. But look, brothers and sisters, I got a long email from a dear friend yesterday, and she told me, she said, Egberto, I was on Medicare Advantage, and I'm going back to Medicare, traditional Medicare, and the supplemental, the Medigap. And she said, I'm doing that because the specialist that I want to see, I couldn't do it with Medicare Advantage. But she said, you must understand, and you must tell. She's a very smart woman. And she said, you must understand that there are some people who simply can't afford traditional Medicare because they can't afford the supplemental. And I understand that. I understand that they've put us between a rock and a hard place. But there are a lot of us who can afford the Medigap program the Medigap piece of, to get traditional Medicare, the part that pays 20%. But many of us are enticed by, hey, I can save this money. Why not? Okay. And that is what these companies bank on, that even though you can afford your Medigap plan just fine, in order to give you choices. They like to talk about, I have some folks in the chat that would say, well, private systems give you choices. It always says choice of slave master. Because when you have the one choice, which is Medicare provided by the government, guess what? You get the choice of which doctor you want to see, not which doctor is on your network, but which doctor you absolutely want to see. Which medicine your doctor prescribed to you, not which medicines are on the plan, not which hospitals are on the plan. You are the one making the choice when you are on traditional Medicare. And of course, when you get a Medigap plan that pays the 20% of that. And like I've mentioned before, a lot of folks would forgive that Medigap, that 20%, because they so overcharge anyway. But remember, when you are, when you're getting your private insurance, the government is still paying for it. They're just paying a premium to those private companies. And you know what is a dirty little secret? Medicare Advantage costs more than traditional Medicare to your government, to your taxes, because they pay those private sector people more than it costs the Medicare system. And that money goes straight into the pockets of the CEOs, the CFOs, the shareholders, and the salespeople that are trying to convince you to get a substandard healthcare plan, one where they are your masters and tell you who you can see, which medicines you can take, which hospitals you can go to. So which master do you want? Do you want the plan that gives you all choices, or do you want to choose from who will enslave you? And like I said, I do understand that financial situations can force some people into having to take that Advantage plan. But let me tell you what the caveat is. Not the caveat. Let me tell you where we are at that. All of the organizations that I work with, I'm talking about the 501c3s and C4s and other types of organizations. Neil Aquino, who's with the Houston Democracy Project, and other organizations. what we are doing is promoting healthcare for all, which would ultimately make Advantage moot and also will make sure to take care of that 20%. If we simply got rid of Medicare Advantage, listen to this, good folks, the waste in Medicare Advantage, there's this theory out there that the private sector is more efficient than the public sector. That is the biggest lie on the planet. And if you want the perfect example of that, and don't laugh when I say it, ask me to prove it. The Postal Service versus the private FedEx, UPS, DHL, or any of the others. Ask to prove it. Even though the Postal Service pays better wages, let's talk about efficiency. They're still more efficient than every single private freight company. Every single one of them. It's never true that for-profit can be more efficient than a non-profit. It's a mathematical impossibility. Does that mean that I want non-profits running everything? Absolutely not. I like choices. But where it comes to healthcare, when it comes to delivery, when it comes to utilities, where it comes to the things that are of absolute necessity to humanity, there should not be an ultimate or an ultimate for profit reason. And that goes as well with healthcare. And that's why one of our major issues, major things that we're working towards are things like healthcare for all, to get rid of the fraud that is the Medicare Advantage and private sector health insurance. Support for this show, Politics Done Right, comes from politicsdoneright.com, publishers of How to Make America Utopia, Take Away the Economy from Those Who Rigged It, As I See It, Class Warfare, The Only Resort to Right-Wing Doom, It's Worth It, How to Talk to Your Right-Wing Relatives, Friends, and Neighbors, and other books written by Egberto, Willies.
Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is a progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, progressive, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. We are an independent media outlet that, unlike mainstream media beholden to corporations, we only owe allegiance to you. Remember, you can also send me a tweet at EGBERTOWILLIES. That is at Egberto Willies. Let us engage. It is Politics Done Right.